Hi everyone, and welcome to the Includability Women's Wellbeing in the Workplace webinar. This one is being hosted by the amazing Baz Moffat. We've got an incredible panel for you today. Some brilliant discussions that will be kind of taking place. So just a bit of, I suppose, housekeeping before we get going, and I hand over to Baz. At any point during this conversation, if you would like to ask a question or you'd like to kind of pose something to any of the panelists, just put into the chat function the name of the person that you'd like to aim the question at, then your question. We're going to be moderating it throughout the webinar, but just make sure that you are proactive, you are interactive, engage with us. All of the points that we're going to be talking about today are really, really important. They don't get discussed anywhere near enough in the workplace at all, and that's for various reasons, and that will be discussed again today. But please just make sure, put your message in, we will moderate it. Anything that we don't ask, we will put to the panelists at the end of the webinar, and then we'll follow it up with a follow-up email. So without kind of further ado, I will hand over to Baz. Have a wonderful webinar, and I'll catch up with you at the end. Baz, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for having us here today, talking about a topic that I could talk about with anybody for all day, every day. And I just think it's really great that we're talking about women's health in the workplace. And actually, the workplace is now seen as a space in which it's really, really important to be talking about women's health. So we've got some really good questions that we're going to be going through over the next hour, but I've got an amazing panel of experts who have lived experiences of women's health, but also work in the corporate space. And I was going to get them all to introduce themselves so we can kind of hear who we've got. So just in terms of the order, I've got people on my screen. Lizzie, can we start with you? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Excited. So, I'm Dr. Lizzie Bernthal, and I spent 25 years in the army as a nurse and a midwife, and latterly head of resilience and wellbeing research. That's absolutely my passion. And now I'm a coach, and I help leaders stand tall, own who they are, and embrace wellbeing in every aspect of their life.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lizzie. And Victoria.
Hey everyone, I'm Victoria Hardy. I am an empathy specialist in corporate banking, primarily working in culture transformation and working on women's health in the workplace around menstrual health and menopause, which is really exciting. I've also got 21 years experience in that world, which is parallel to my own women's health journey, which is the lens that I'll bring today. So that's through endometriosis, fertility, high-risk pregnancy, and hysterectomy into surgical menopause. So yeah, that's me.
Right background. Covered off lots of things there, Victoria.
Yeah, tick, tick, tick.
Yeah, exactly. Matthew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Baz. So hi, everyone. My name's Matthew Locke, and I'm co-founder of Outliers Wellbeing. And we are a wellbeing organisation that specialises in supporting happiness of people in the workplace. Me personally, I spent 20 years running around, not quite sure what I wanted to do and searching for my calling, and supporting corporates is exactly that. Right now, I'm a father of a beautiful little daughter called Dorothy. I'm a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious. This is an interesting space for me and something that I'm coming in with a toddler mindset, ready to learn. And that is me.
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you. And I think that, like, me and you caught up last week, didn't we, about this and kind of shared the fact that you were like, I'm not really an expert in this space, but I'm willing to learn. And I think that's just what's brilliant about includability and these forums, in that although I am, and you can hear why Victoria will be really comfortable talking about her story because she's talked about it over and over again. And I'm really comfortable talking about women's health, but there are other topics that I'm not comfortable about talking about. And so to have somebody here that kind of admits that off the get-go, I just think absolutely brilliant. So thank you for coming. Gavin.
Hey guys, I'm Gavin. I'm the other co-founder of Outliers Wellbeing. And my background is in health and fitness. I was a personal trainer for about 20 years and working in various fields, physio, rehab, kind of nutrition, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm a little bit nervous as well, but really excited. There's some amazing research coming out. Not enough, maybe we'll touch on that, but amazing research around health and well-being generally, but especially women's. And it's an area that's really quite lacking. And I'm fascinated by, what's happening and seeing that kind of area improve generally. So that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gavin. I'll introduce myself, which when you all introduced yourselves, I was like, I probably should have done this at the beginning, but here we go. I'm Baz Moffat and my background is in sport. So I was on the British rowing team for 4 years, like pushing my buddy, eyes on the prize, fully focused, approach to life, and won world championship medals. And then since retiring from sport, I've been a personal trainer. And since having my children, I've really focused and got very passionate about pelvic health. So I have coached hundreds, if not thousands of women around their pelvic floor, and not just postnatal women, menopausal women, 20-year-olds, Olympic athletes, people that want to do park run, across the board. And I've also delivered a lot of this content corporately, which has just been absolutely incredible. And I'm co-founder of the Well HQ. And the Well is all about providing knowledge about the female body and how it works. And we want to really educate women and those who support women about health and exercise through the female filter. And I think that we'll be covering, there'll be different ways of describing that female filter, but I think we'll be like talking about that a lot because I think it's so important when it comes to incorporating women's health into the workplace setting. So I'm going to start off by talking about COVID because I want to just kind of like get an understanding from the panel as to, do they feel that the global pandemic has helped or hindered the women's health in the workplace? Now, we know like all the research is out there and it's indisputable about the impact this has had on everybody, but particularly women with caring responsibilities and the mental load and the impact on jobs and the impact on homeschooling and all that kind of stuff. So women have been hit hard, but has that raised awareness within the workplace as, oh my God, like we've got to step up now? Like, what are the conversations that you're having either with clients or within your workspace around women's health? Do you feel that this is like more on the agenda? Anyone like to start?
Okay, I'll chip in. Yeah. So I think, as you said, absolutely, Baz. I honestly feel, sadly, we've stepped back a bit. And I've been doing some research with a big global organisation about women's role in leadership. And I think as a result of the pandemic, as you say, so many women have been suffering in the fact that they're doing all the homeschooling and all that kind of stuff. And as a result, the people that are coming through my doors are lots of women who are lacking confidence. And it's simply because I think they're just juggling so much that's just questioning them to feel, am I up to this? Whereas a year ago or 18 months ago, they were just carrying on with their stuff and getting on with it. So that's where I've seen it very much.
And what's the reaction of the workplace? Do they now have so you're saying that like women have been hit hard. Do you feel that now the workplace is saying, oh, actually, we need to provide more support for women, like through that female filter, like for women specifically?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think it very much depends on the organisation, and I'm sure Matt and Gab will have comments about this. It very much depends if it's a purpose-driven, vision, values-driven organisation, in which case they value their teams and they will do all they can to support their teams. Unfortunately, there's a lot of organisations that aren't purpose-driven, and therefore it's just like, getting on with the job. And that's a vast generalisation, but that's from my experience so far.
Yeah. Matthew or Gavin, what's your experience of this?
I don't disagree with Lizzie. I think that organisations, everyone's been blindsided by what's happening. I know we're 15, 16 months in, but I do think that organisations they've gone from kind of this level of probably feeling like they're strategising their wellbeing provision. And that might not have included particularly women's mental health or women's wellbeing. And then suddenly blindsided, and then it's just a kind of sink or swim approach. And I think that it's probably not got the strategy, and therefore looking after specific cohorts has probably fallen off the wagon. And that's what we're seeing. And we're in a position where we can talk to lots of businesses. And, even we have probably been caught up and been a little bit guilty of going, well, actually, let's provide provision across the board and not looking at specific groups of need, which is certainly something that I'm considering in depth. But I think businesses are trying, is what I'm trying to say. They are definitely trying. And I think we should, certainly give them a pat on the back, because it's tough at the moment, isn't it?
It's really tough. And I think that, that provision across the board, you get it, because it will kind of like, you might do how to manage anxiety, for example, and it'd be like, everyone's welcome. Let's like, we're not going to like focus on anyone in particular. So therefore it's okay. It's fair. Like the budget can be allocated to everybody, but who does that serve? And like what are the specific needs? And I've, when I've gone in and worked, when I've gone and done sort of like sales pitches, so to speak, or like people have got in contact and I'm saying, okay, we're going to do a pelvic floor webinar. And they're like, God, that's specific. That is really specific. Are you sure? Like who is, and it's almost there's a fear of really serving one particular group because it will seem unfair to everybody else. Yeah. Yeah. Victoria, you were nodding your head.
Yeah, I was trying to get off on mute. Sorry. Yeah, I agree that with what's been said around the kind of, I work in a large corporate company, and trying to get the spread of the looking after mental health, looking after physical health, making sure everyone has their equipment, it can get lost into who is automatically stepping up into those carers roles, who's automatically stepping up into looking after the children and balancing and juggling, just like Lizzie was saying. So there's been that sort of, has to take that step back to have that lens on exactly that. Who are we serving, to make sure that we're getting the messages out there? I would say, though, on the flip side of COVID, what I'm finding and having conversations within peers and wider, and when we're gathering insight as well, is around actually how women are learning a little bit more about themselves. And maybe that is a generalization of us as humans, but particularly in the space that I do, that I think, we alluded to it before, that we've all been on 100 mile an hour. Suddenly the world presses pause and we're all like, oh, okay, what's happening in my body? What's happening in my mind? And connecting, ourselves a little bit more with understanding how we show up at work, and how do our menstrual cycles fit in? How are we if we're in menopause? Is that affecting, is that connected to our anxiety? Or again, is working from home benefiting people a lot more? So there's that kind of flip side as well of, the more positive outlook, that people are becoming more self-aware of their symptoms, or what's going on, or things that affect them showing up as women to work, and then how they can kind of then take the next step to get what they need.
And do you feel that self-aware? So there's like self-awareness is it's a huge part, isn't it, of your health, but then it's also having the confidence to share that self-awareness. And so, we know from the research that many menopausal women will miss days off work, but they won't say it's because of menopausal symptoms. We know that same with, Victoria, I've talked to you about your endometriosis. You've given me so many examples of when you just did not admit at all for fear of being disciplined. Like, you don't say you're missing work because of your women's health symptoms. Do you feel that and again, I know it's going to be cultural specific, but do you feel that the women are almost getting more and more able to talk about what they're experiencing and not having to fake it and say they've just got a migraine or something? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think we are on the cusp of a turning point. We're definitely not there. And even in just the recent weeks, we've seen things like the Davina McCall program that, is it's called Hot Topic. Everyone says Hot Topic, that then just opens the lid a little bit. I think what we've seen in the last year as well is a huge influx of social media as well. So, we've all potentially sat on social media more, so people are connecting and talking about it in that space. And it is just that, once somebody talks and somebody's brave enough, the rest will start to follow. We're definitely not there. There's definitely still shame. There's definitely still cultural boundaries that are put in place that we need to, break those doors down on, and educate ourselves more around that, and how we help and support each other through that. But yeah, we're definitely at a shift. So I would say from even 2 years ago, from what I was experiencing to what I'm seeing now, people in the workspace talking about it more, and men actually talking about it more. I was sat in a pub a couple of weekends ago, and I suddenly found a guy talking to me about menopause just purely because he'd seen something on my Instagram that opened a conversation about his wife. And I was like, oh, all right, I'm out for a Saturday night. But it's just that kind of like, he felt like it was okay. So we're seeing it in dribs and drabs, but there's still more to do.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right. So, Dr. Lizzie, you've done an amazing PhD, and you will be far more articulate at explaining this concept than I will be. But I'd love you to explain in simple terms the difference between fitting into an organization and belonging. And I think that, like, you know, we're great. I'm the Well HQ, and lots of people I know are great fans of Brené Brown's work, who talks about this a lot. But I'd love you to explain that concept, and then we can think about like how that applies to women's health in the workplace.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we all have a basic fundamental need of wanting to belong. And it's going back to history, you know, like millions of years ago, whereas if we weren't part of the tribe, we would die. The tiger would eat us and no one would protect us and we would die. So we have a fundamental need. The issue is that what's really interesting about we all want to feel we fit in. And yet the irony is fitting in is the opposite of belonging. Because when we belong, the only person that matters that we belong to is ourselves. Because if we belong to ourselves, we are being authentic. We are being our true person. We are being the person we really are. When we fit in, we're actually a bit like a chameleon. We're wanting to change ourselves in order to fit in. And in the process of changing ourselves, we are actually not being true to ourselves. And that is when we get mental health issues and all that stuff kicks in, because suddenly we're not being true to ourselves, and that is incongruous with who we really are. So that's a sort of simple explanation.
Well done. In a nutshell, that was fabulous. So when we talk about it, I talk about it a lot in sport, and how, you know, for women to thrive in sport, and you can use it in any, you know, whether it's in the military, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the family, like for women to thrive, they have to feel like they truly belong. And that means that the whole of them has to be able to show up. So you can't just have like the superficial stuff showing up. The whole of them has to show up. So their periods have to show up, their sore boobs have to show up, their menopausal symptoms have to show up. None of it can be hidden. And it doesn't mean that we have to celebrate it and we have to, like, everyone has to be talking about it and be really comfortable about it. But it does mean that we shouldn't be hiding tampons up our sleeve or pretending that like we're okay when we're not okay. So my obvious example of this difference between fitting in and belonging is toilets. Like, I think that like the toilet situation is a really good example of how an organization cares about their women. So I think that if you look at the stat or a football stadium or a sport or a swimming pool, like the facilities that they provide for everybody and the basic facilities gives a really good impression. So we know that when men go to the toilet, they need certain things. And we know that when women go to the toilet, they need a cubicle, they need toilet paper. When they're on their period, they need a clean sanitary bin to dispose of their products. And that sanitary bin needs to be in every single toilet, not just in the period loo. And they all also get caught short. And it's not women don't get caught short because they are lazy or unorganized. Like, periods are irregular, and menopausal women many women will have irregular periods and they might get caught short. So they need to have access to sanitary products. So we always say that the low-lying fruit is to kind of get the toilets sorted out, because then that women feel that they will truly belong in that workplace. So anyone got anything else that they kind of like would like to talk about in terms of the difference between belonging and fitting in, and how corporate policy, whether that's around the menopause, whether it's pre and postnatal, whether it's parental leave from from mothers or fathers, like how can, like, if we open up this conversation a bit more, has anyone got anything else they'd like to share around this belonging and fitting in? Any examples? Yes, Victoria.
So I think as well, as part of women feeling like they belong in being themselves, is having that I'm going to speak with the empathy specialist in me now, is having that layer of empathy and that emotional intelligence that, that can come with being female. And I think sometimes in organizations, there can be this kind of stigma around, right, okay, I'll get to a certain level and then I have to become almost something else to show up, rather than actually us really encouraging and celebrating that, some of the things that are more natural as a woman, and that can be, that empathetic viewpoint and that kind of bringing people together and all of those great elements. And I think that can sometimes be lost, maybe less more now than it was in kind of years gone past, but we do still see that in the corporate world, particularly, is that there is that level of, as you can go up the corporate ladder, sometimes you can lose that element of empathy because it feels like you need to fit in somewhere else rather than, feeling like you belong.
Yeah. Yes, Lizzie.
I think that I would totally agree. Empathy is a massive, massive issue here, but also I think it's definitely to do with identity as well. Now, we all have multiple identities, whether you're mother, parent, child, coach, businesswoman, whatever you are, we all have multiple identities. And it's all about being authentic. So it's the person you are when no one's watching. That is your true you, not the person you step up to be when you're in a big meeting or whatever. And I think when you are true to yourself, as you are that same person in every environment, somehow these identities don't create so much conflict. But I appreciate, we all have multiple identities, and it's creating those boundaries and setting boundaries emotionally, physically, environmentally, every level, so that, I think this is where COVID has been really interesting for women working at home, because often I'm finding for my work is the women are the ones that are sitting on the kitchen table or having to sit on the sofa with their laptop. And I know this is vast generalisation, but, and I think that's where it is interesting. But, it's been who you are all the time. That's all I would say.
Matthew.
It's really interesting. I'm trying to have a viewpoint from the businesses we work with, and to date, because we're 15 months old as well as a business, we haven't gone into businesses to really consult with leadership and work at that level about exactly what they're doing for females. So I'll twist it and think about kind of personal experience, and also our company. Gav and I have grown from me and him, and there's 5 of us, and two of our team are female. And what we're trying to do, and I think the nail on the head Victoria and Lizzie both mentioned was empathy. So Gav and I are learning all the time. We are, and we're not necessarily going to suddenly collar one of our female team and say, right, we need to talk about this because I need to learn more and you need to tell me more and we need to have this discussion now. But we are trying to just build that environment where everything's on the table, and we're building enough rapport, and we're building the personal relationships, which comes back to empathy. We have a mantra in our business, which is don't be a plonker. And that literally runs across every single business activity. And that includes how we speak to our people. And if we're unsure of something, we say, okay, well, I don't want to be a plonker here, so can you maybe just offer me a bit of support? And I think that just from a conversation I've had recently, that's enabling us to create a psychologically safe place, a good environment. And that also means Gav and I can put our hand up and say, I'm not quite sure. So I think that's how we're trying to create belonging in our small team at the moment, which is, challenging.
Yeah. Gavin, have you got something?
So I was just going to adding to that, one of the ways that we kind of find out what a business needs, and it's not there. It's not a finished article. Is simply by asking. And as we getting into this, the insights process is becoming more and more important. We're realizing just bloody ask. Just rather than us assuming. But we've got females on our team, but that doesn't give us the right to assume what we have to do. And you mentioned earlier about like managing anxiety workshop, for example, and maybe there wouldn't be one in an ideal world. There wouldn't be one managing anxiety. It's a big topic. Maybe there'd be 3, but then maybe we could subdivide it into 6, and maybe there'd be a male and a female one, for example. But then you kind of but we wouldn't know that unless we asked, and unless we understood the organisation. there's a financial, it becomes financially prohibitive, I'm sure, you know, when you have to split everything by two, but maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe there's a better way to join it all up together. So we're delivering what people need, not what we assume. So
this is a really interesting point, Gavin, that you've just raised about so there's quite a lot of conversation going on in the chat right now around this is a private issue. I don't think women's health should be discussed in the workplace. I would be mortified to talk about my hormones to anybody. We just need to keep it to ourselves, or there's no way a male manager would ever be able to talk about this, you know, to their females. And so my question is, there was a report published in 2019 by ROCOG, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and it stated that women are woefully uneducated about their bodies and the life stages they are going to be experiencing. So many people assume that because that women just know what puberty is, what menstrual cycle is, what fertility is, what their birth experience is going to be like, what perimenopause is going to be like, and this research clearly showed that they don't. And the issue is, if you don't know about puberty, then you're really unprepared for it, and it has a massive impact on you. But then you're also just you're not going to be educated about anything else. So how do we? And it has a huge impact. It has a huge impact on your mental health, on your emotional health, on your physical health. So within a workplace setting, we know that 10% of menopausal women leave the workplace, and 25% are thinking about leaving. So their mindset is, I don't fit in here. I don't belong here. I've put on loads of weight. I've got massive brain fog. I can't think of the right words. And the easiest thing for me to do is just leave, because there's no way I can have a conversation about it, because no one else is having a conversation about it. So that's the situation. And menopause is just one example. It'll be happening with endometriosis. It will be happening with women who've experienced sexual abuse. It'll be happening across the board. How do we take off all the women into a room and teach them privately, or which I've done, right? So I've done that in a workplace. I've gone off and the room is full to bursting, and there are oversharers, and women are sharing their experiences and their stories, and there's a real sisterhood and a camaraderie, and and their experiences are validated. But the men and the manager, the people who don't have that lived experience, need a safe place too. Matthew and Gavin, you've shared that, but you need a safe place to mess up and ask the questions that you feel are inappropriate, to kind of to say, oh my God, I really want to ask this, but I'm petrified of getting it wrong. You need a safe place too. So should you be taken off? So should anyone who's managing women be taken off, or supporting women be taken off into a room to be given that support? And then how do we but then ultimately we've got to get together, haven't we, as well? So it's just, I don't, and everyone's going to be at a different stage of this. So it's where is there a blueprint? Is there a model which well, actually, to start off with, we need to start off with in this situation. But what are your thoughts around teaching people separately, bringing it in together? Yeah. And the value of that. Victoria, would you like to start? Because you were just because I feel you're nodding and agreeing with me.
I feel like I'm nodding away here so much. Okay. So I would look at this as people who are feeling directly impacted and people who are allies. So you've then got that split. So actually you're then just not focusing on, if you're somebody experiencing, and we'll use menopause, but I think you're right, this could go across the board on many subjects. If you're somebody experiencing menopause directly as a person and you want to come and share that, and let's be honest, that's going to be more than women in the room. We have a huge transgender community within our organisation, that also will be feeling this from a different point of view. So that's really important too. And then you have those that want to understand more and shouldn't be excluded from the conversation, and that need to know what they need to know. So, and again, an ally could be a woman who's 23, who's new, managing a new team, that has zero, literally has simple period once a month, like clockwork, hooray, and has no other broad vision of what else is on there, but actually within her team could have various different things that she needs to support. So therefore, she is an ally at that point until it's something that directly affects. So rather than the male and female, I would just put that lens on it. I do think, it's really interesting. I know, Baz, we've talked before that, that it's been hugely successful by splitting. What we've seen within the organisation that I work for is we have had, we've done open forums, and again, the rooms have been filled with both male and female. And actually it is the guys that have been raising their hands wanting to know because their wives have been going through it, or they're noticing something in their teams that are going through it. But I think maybe changing the viewpoint to directly affected and allyship maybe could be a lens to take.
Anyone else want to jump in on this?
I will, because my first thought is get me involved in the sisterhood because it sounds bloody awesome. But then Victoria perfectly explained why potentially it could be framed slightly differently. So from a personal point of view, I know how I'm hardwired, and it's like jump in 2-footed, and that probably wouldn't even be great for the psych safety piece because I'm like, tell me more. I want to be a bit of a child about it, but I completely agree. Giving enough information so people can be allies. I think there's one overarching theme for me that I probably didn't mention as early as I should, was kind of these kind of just entrenched cultural issues and ideas that we have, and that's something we're constantly swimming against. So what is viewed as appropriate to talk about and not appropriate? For me, I'm incredibly open, so chat about anything because I'm more than happy with that. But I think that we have always got to be aware of that these conversations have to happen, but the subtle tweak, and this is going back to Victoria, is about how we create these good environments where people can get the information they need, but also where people can potentially share about the personal stuff as well. I think it's very important.
And I think getting the information that they need, not when they need it. And I know that might sound a bit weird, but like when you are in that dark space, so like when you are in that space of like that downward spiral, whatever it's in, whether it's in mental health, or it's in physical health, or it's in sort of women's health, that is not the time where you need to be hunting around for information. I think that it's that kind of, that's why I'm such an advocate for kind of like, it has to be a cultural thing. This has to be something that an organization commits to, like they have to mental health. Like it's that kind of like commitment within an organization that this is just normal, so that you don't wait until people are in crisis before you're ready to support them.
Yeah, just quickly on that. That's what we are kind of shouting from the rooftops around every single bit of provision we do. Don't stick a plaster on one when needed. Like, let's be upstream. And you're right, it's how we create that culture. And I tell you what, this is a bloody good first step, isn't it? By having these conversations on here. And then I know it's not your first step, Baz. So I think that we should all be having these chats, and then we'll create a culture. It's just we could do with another 6 million people on the call, not 40.
Exactly. I'm just going to dive into what a couple of comments in the chat. So talking about hormones is not exclusive to the sex hormones associated with menstruation to menopause. Why are we not talking about hormones in terms of mental health and the impact of cortisol and insulin? Estrogen and testosterone are neurotransmitters in the brain, which when I last checked, we all have. Hormone health is for everyone, which I agree with. I agree that we all have hormones, and my colleague, Dr. Emma Ross, has this really massive issue when people are told like your hormone, stop being hormonal, or you're being hormonal, which is generally associated with the time of the month for women. And it's like, we are hormonal the whole time, like everyone's hormonal. I think the issue, well, it's not the issue, but that the fact is that men have a daily rhythm and women have this monthly rhythm. And also women go through perimenopause, and it is an inevitable life stage, which all women are going to be going through. And some will be going through pregnancy and postnatal as well. And it's no longer the end of life. Like it's like the perimenopause and menopause is no longer the stop time. It's a time where women are like the peak of approaching the peak of their career and have at least a third of their life ahead of them. And there is just so little provision for women in that life stage that it's really been identified as a group that needs more support. But without a doubt, like, of course, we are all hormonal, and insulin has massive impacts and cortisol has massive impacts. But I think it's what, it's the women's health piece has got so much attention because there is so little research and so little support out there for this, for these life stages and for this group. Anyone else got anything else? Yes, Lizzie.
I think education is already put on the chat. Education is absolutely key. So yeah, obviously having more and more awareness. And I think there's still, I mean, being just about a post-menopausal woman myself, I was completely naive. When my mental health was suffering when I went into the menopause, I just thought because life and work was really stressful at the time. And that's I'm a midwife. So I think the more and more we can educate when we don't, as you say, when we don't need it. So it's just become, anymore there's a parent, you have a duty to understand a bit what your children are going through at puberty. The more we have these conversations and the more we stop, we need to joke about it in a way because we want to make it light and not serious, but it's still a big joke. I'm having a hot flush, which is great because it is, make these things funny and amusing because that's where we learn. But it's acknowledging that actually sometimes, different clothes you have to wear, just all sorts of different impact that different stages you have to have according to what you're going through. And it happens every minute of every day. So it's just education on every level.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to give an example of a conversation we had, like after a talk. There was it happened to be a man, and he was managing a team, and he knew, and he was one of his members of his team was in his opinion not performing well. She was kind of like she was not performing as well as she should be. And we were doing 3 different webinars. We did one on pelvic floor, one on menstrual cycle, and one on menopause. And he came to them all, and it was all online, which online is actually, although I so miss like the energy of a room and feeling and presenting, online is such a safe place to deliver this taboo content. And it's because everyone can show up without showing up. And so no one needs to know that you're there. No one needs to know. And the questions can be asked without actually being there. But that's an aside. So he came on this call, and this woman came on this call, and we talked about this condition called PMDD, which is a relatively recent condition. And it's when women experience really, really significant symptoms premenstrually. And it can be sort of suicidal thoughts, like severe depression, but it's just the week before their period and then it goes. So it's kind of like, they're kind of all right. And it's really underdiagnosed. So this guy was like, this woman's really underperforming. She didn't really know what it was. But from our talk and from being educated, she was like, oh, like maybe it's PMDD, went to her GP, got a diagnosis. And this all sounds very, very simple. But effectively, she was then able to have a conversation with her manager and say, look, you know what, for 3 days a month, I am in a really bad place. Like I just need to be protected and supported. Like I can share with you, like when those days are. But it was just a weight off everybody's shoulders. It was like, he was like, I get it. Like, I totally get it. It is only 3 days a month, but I don't know when it's going to happen, when it's not going to happen. So they then worked out a plan so that she was supported for those couple of days a month. And she was also supported medically. But through educating him, through educating her, it gave them both permission to talk about this stuff. And I think just from my experience, I feel that the workplace is an amazing setting because this content is free for those people who, obviously the workplaces have to pay to get the likes of us in, but the women don't, and the managers don't. And there is a huge issue. Women don't like to pay for healthcare. None of us like to pay for healthcare in this country because we're kind of in this mindset of like, education has generally been free for us and healthcare has generally been free for us. So when you ask people to pay for things, it's kind of like, it's a challenge. But if they're provided for free, then more people show up, and that education piece has a massive impact on these people that wouldn't ordinarily access this care if the barrier was a payment. Yeah. Gavin, did you just supporting and saying thumbs up?
No, I actually had a question for you, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Like the whole area of kind of hormones and neurotransmitters, I find fascinating. But I guess, unfortunately, I think most of the research has been done on blokes. So it's, there's a lot left to be researched. But with your sporting background, are you seeing using this knowledge and this information to optimize performance around sport? Are you seeing a crossover into optimizing performance in a workplace? Is that science crossing over?
It's hardly even happening in sport. Like, it's hardly. So it's like we are at the early stages right now of sport. Sport are just about getting there. The professional, there will be individuals within sport who are like embracing this. But we were doing an event last week. We did a live workshop for a national governing body last week, and they were like, "Can you give us examples of like where this has been being done really, really well?" And we couldn't give a country, a governing body, a sport who are doing this women's health piece really well. What tends to happen in sport is that they medicalize it. So they medicalize women. And this is something that I'm like really passionate about, is that we're not medical, right? So like there are times when we need medical care and we need medical help. But at the moment, the only people you can really talk to about any of your women's health concerns is a GP or a gynecologist or a complementary and health expert in women's health. You can't have a conversation with your PE teacher, with your manager, with anyone else that isn't medical. And it's like, you shouldn't have to be an absolute expert in women to talk about women. And so we're like, you need more experts, but actually we're saying we need to give everyone the vocabulary and everyone the confidence to use it. So it just becomes normal to create an environment in which girls and women can ask for support and talk about what's happening to them. Yeah. I want to move on. We've got like 5-10 minutes left, really, just to finish this up and say like, let's dream big and let's think like, what does the future hold? So like fast forward into a place where, if you think where mental health was and where, sexuality was sort of 5 to 10 years ago, they were really, really massively taboo topics. And, very few people would admit to having depression or anxiety, and many people wouldn't be comfortable like coming out as what their sexual preference was. But now that world has moved on. It's not perfect, but it's moved on. I feel women's health is where those two things were sort of 5-10 years ago. What do you feel the future looks like? Have you got what would you like the future to look like in terms of women's health within the organizations you're working with and supporting? Victoria.
Okay, so for me, I'm really passionate about how the schools, colleges, university are picking up these conversations. This is something that I'm looking at externally from the corporate world. And I think because that is the next generation, and we have this beautiful generation of kids who are so much more open than we ever were. They are coming out, they are having conversation. The boyfriends are going to the school nurse asking for a tampon for their girlfriend. It's starting to happen. It's starting to happen organically, though, because they're watching Netflix, not because they're getting educated properly in schools, not because they're continuing those education through the schools into colleges and understanding everything that's on the chat, the mental health side, how it affects the body, how it affects relationships, and how they belong at work. So for me, a future world is where we have scooped up that beautiful cohort of the next generation, and they are in our workplace really showing us how it's done and really kind of working together to educate, kind of the sort of crushing the taboos that have been there through no fault of anybody. They're just there, and they're really willing to ask those extra questions. And we've got the correct policies in place that support the stuff that needs to be supported, because policies are really important. But equally, we've got just great one-to-one conversations where, as human to humans, we can just talk to each other and say, look, this is going on for me right now. And I'm going to work my schedule around how I'm feeling, or I'm going to work my job around how I'm feeling, and just create a lot more flexibility. So that's what it looked like for me.
you kind of said it, but I'd add to what you've just said around, and we've definitely talked about it, that I think women's health would be less of a show. Do you know that we wouldn't have like menopause week and spend 10 grand on a speaker to come and like inspire and be the expert and then go home and then come back again the year after. It would be like, I do a show, I do the menopause show, but it's not enough. It is not enough. And unless you get like, and we don't need, although Davina has done an incredible job at like raising awareness, like you don't need that in a workplace. You need that, but that's the launch and the firework display. But then I would really hope that within sort of 3 to 5 years time, the show comes in, but then there's this massive, there's already an infrastructure, there's a policy, there's an infrastructure, there's mandatory training of managers, and there's just buy-in, from the organisation, because the shows aren't enough, are they?
Yeah, absolutely not. And it is about embedding it, and it is about how, that's continually supported year on year and growing, and like that it just becomes part of everyday conversation. Yeah. And it is really important, that it is about, so that people that don't feel so openly to talk, that's okay, but it's just about them in the future being able to say, look, I'm just going through something right now, or I think I'm hitting the menopause, and I'm just going to leave that with you. And then there's a support network that they have to go for, to the leaders understand how they can support without, for that person that doesn't want to kind of lay it all out on the table. But yeah, that it's just that human to human conversation, just through kind of like when you ask that question, how are you today? That you can really understand what's going on.
Yeah, brilliant. Lizzie, what do you see?
Yeah, I totally build on what Victoria said about schools, and I help with a school, but I think it's every hormone situation in the school, not just focusing on puberty. So they might have, their mums might be going through the menopause. So starting off at that age, but also so it becomes so normal that when you join a new business, you have to read some information or do a short course or something in hormonal health for men and women, as much as you'd have to do the fire drill, as much as you have to know where the exits are. So it's so embedded that then you naturally have those conversations, because everybody then is at the same level of knowledge, and that's where the challenge is. Some know about it, some don't know about it, some don't want to know about it, some just think they know about it but they don't. So
yeah, perfect. Matthew and Gavin.
I agree wholeheartedly with Lizzie and Victoria. I think there's a wider conversation about the outputs of a child going to school, which is probably a conversation for another time, having spent 10 years in education. So I think that, I agree, definitely the education piece. But I suppose for me, and thinking about what I potentially can control or influence, I should say, is creating or supporting a generation of leaders that really understand the connection between performance and happiness. Performance has become a bit of a dirty word, and I really don't believe it should be. I think performance and happiness can work perfectly together. And if you would like your people to perform and be happy, well, then we need to put most things on the table, or create an environment where people feel comfortable to bring most things on the table. So that's, for me, a kind of a medium-term goal, and something I'd love to see.
Great, thank you. Gavin?
Yeah, similar to that, really. I think, a lot of these things, as you mentioned, can be kind of box ticking exercises, and you get someone in to talk about Mental Health Awareness Week, and someone else come in to talk about Menopause Week or whatever. But I think it's just really kind of understanding what's going on. Like, what's your goal here? What are you trying to achieve? Because you can waste a lot of cash and a lot of time, and leave a bad taste in people's mouths, because if they come off the back of one of these workshops, seminars, whatever it might be, and haven't really got much out of it, they might just become a bit disengaged with the whole process. I think it's really important that the content you're delivering is relevant, and it's kind of created and driven by the people, and again, if the end goal is just to make people happier and healthier, then that's the end goal. It shouldn't just be a box ticking exercise, because it can get wasted.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm about to hand over to Paul to finish up here, but I just want to say that, you can tell from the amount of conversations going on in the chat that this like triggers some really like black and white it's some black and white emotions in people, and some people just feel really confused. So it's like, absolutely not, this is not where I want to be. Absolutely, this is a really great place. And then there's people stuck in the middle who are like, oh God, this feels like a good thing, but I just don't know like where on earth to start. And for me, that's again like what I love about includability. And I'm not on, and I'm not a salesperson whatsoever for these guys, but it's messy, and we're not going to get it right. And I think we've got to be comfortable with that. And we've all just got to we've got to try, I think there's so much evidence around like how much support, how we could do so much better. We can do so much more. And so there are a lot of low-lying fruit that like don't involve anything awkward, any difficult conversations. But I think if everyone comes from a genuine place, and everyone is coming from a genuine place, everyone is coming from a place where they really, really want to help and support, but it's that, and we're not going to get it right. But I think once we've all straight away, if we've all accepted that, then that's kind of, then I feel that's okay. And I just think the amount of conversation that's happening just shows how relevant this topic is. So I just like to thank Paul for having me, and thanks for all the panelists who've done an absolutely amazing job. And if you can stay on, because Paul, we just want to gather a little bit of information about what you think and your opinions are on this. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Baz, and thank you to kind of all the panelists and all the attendees for all of your questions and kind of points, all very valid. And I think there's kind of some key takeaway points here, and the main one, as we always say with every single webinar, is there needs to be constant focus on everything that we do. You can't just do something for 1 week of the year and then put it in a drawer, put it away, and everything's going to be fine. It doesn't work like that. Everyone needs focus. The whole company needs buy-in from leaders throughout the workforce. We are going to be running a Menti survey in a minute, and there's some questions on there where you've got free-form answers. Now, put yourself in the mindset of either the company you currently work with, or perhaps some of the companies you've worked in the past. But all of these, we want to kind of trigger the further kind of webinars that we'll have, or the Q&As, or the conversations we'll have with the companies and the individuals within them. So the whole point, as kind of Baz said about includability, is us trying to make sure that we make a difference, we take action, and we don't just tick a box. There is no kind of place for that. There's plenty of people that just tick a box. It's about making a difference. So the key takeaways, I think, be who you are all of the time. Companies have got to provide an environment where you genuinely can be who you are. That can only come through an awful lot of education, very good, clear communication. And yes, as people were putting in the chat, it is down to the individual. Not everyone feels comfortable talking about such personal topics, and that is absolutely fine. But I do think that companies have such a key role to play in providing an environment where if you want to feel like you want to talk about it, you can. Not giving people that ability just provides a very stale, quite a divisive working environment, and certainly one where people will end up leaving. You've got to be yourself, regardless of the subject that you're talking about. And I loved Victoria's point about kind of having those kind of looking at it from two lenses, where you've got the lived experience and you've got the allyship, and then making sure that kind of they come together, and so that everyone's building their knowledge and you're learning kind of from each other. So I'll share my screen now. At the top of the screen, you will see that there is a code. So if you're going to get your phones out, you don't need to download anything, but just in your browser, just type in Menti, click on the link that comes up, and then you will see that there is a code at the top, which in this instance is 12800160. There's five questions that we're going to run through. Please get involved. If you don't want to, that's absolutely fine. Everything that is on here is anonymous, but we will be including it in the follow-up email afterwards, along with the questions that everyone's asked that we haven't managed to get through. So the first question is, and again, does your company or previous company encourage? I can't actually see my screen. Bear with me 1 second. I need to try and get this off. One moment, please. You can obviously see the question, but it would be great if I could read it at the same time.
Do you want to speak?
At the moment,
I can
there's an awful lot
read
of
through it if you like.
Paolo, would you like me to
Shall I be the voice on over the top? Matt and Gav, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. So question number one, does your company encourage open and honest discussion about women's well-being, i.e. the menopause? Paul, I think you've got it back with you.
I have. Perfect.
Back over to you. Safe hands.
Amazing. So really it's yes, no, or prefer not to say. And again, it's entirely kind of down to how you feel your company it interacts and communicates and offers the employees and yourself. I will now go on to the next one. So does your company educate managers on women's well-being, symptoms to look out for, and the appropriate support to offer? Again, this is a really, really key point. Focus on kind of women's well-being and understanding the symptoms, or certainly what to keep an eye out for. That's great, but do they know the appropriate support to offer, or certainly kind of that signposting who within the business is that support network, as we've discussed during the webinar. I will now go on to the next slide. So this is something that kind of Baz and I have spoken about a number of times, and this is free text. So we would just love to know your thoughts, but without clear and obvious return on investment, we'd love to know what you feel kind of companies, or how companies can prove the value of investing in women's well-being. We believe it should be, as a matter of course, part of the strategy. There should be budget assigned to it, and it's got clear benefits across the whole business, including, the dirty word that is profitability. But we would love to know from yourself. You've got kind of short answers are recommended, but definitely just start writing your answers in there now on what you feel companies can kind of do to prove the value of investing in women's well-being. So open forums, I think was mentioned during the webinar as well. I think that's a really good point. How do you provide a safe environment for people to talk about topics and subjects that are taboo? People are scared, people are anxious about this, and this goes across the whole of, say, diversity and inclusion, mental health, well-being. There's so many things that people feel scared about talking about. We, as businesses and as leaders, as organizations, we have a responsibility to provide that level of education and that safe environment for everyone to ask a question, free from the fear of causing offense. I think that goes without saying. So strategic guidance and regular feedback and monitoring kind of employees' health, should it be part of the one-to-one process? Again, understanding how people can really gauge and how do you embed it into a business and then monitor those kind of results and what you're getting from it. I will now go on to the next slide. This is a more generic, and it doesn't have to be focused on women's well-being, but what would you like to see your company focusing on over the next 12 months? The next 12 months, heading back hopefully into a new normal way of life, heading back into the office. What would you like to see your company? You've got 3 options that you can write down and then press submit. For me, I want companies to have, I think, continual focus on flexible working. I think there needs to be stronger focus on their strategies and more transparency around what they do. EDI, leadership support, well-being, specific topics. Supporting working parents, that's a very good one. And I think there's going to be so much anxiety around when people go back into the office. There was anxiety before the very first lockdown, and I think that same anxiety, if not more, is going to be focused on heading back into the office when people have been so used to it for 18 months. So I think companies need to be very focused on that as well. Leadership upskilling, that's a really good one. empathy, we've spoken about that again. Multiple people have spoken about on this webinar. I think leading with empathy, showing empathy, it's one of the greatest traits that people can have. And if it's a genuine thing, then people can do very well from it, and businesses can definitely benefit. And these slides will be sent out as well in the follow-up email. And finally, as with all of our webinars, we always choose a B1G1 project to donate on behalf of all the attendees and the panelists. So the three options you've got are raise reproductive health awareness among women in India, provide sanitary pads to girls in Kenya, or provide menstrual hygiene training to schoolgirls in Tanzania. So please do choose the one that resonates with you most, that you would like to choose. I'll give it 30 seconds or so, and then I'll press enter, and then we'll see what the winning project is. We will give it another 10 seconds or so, then I'll press enter. And so we will be providing menstrual hygiene training to schoolgirls in Tanzania. And again, we'll kind of send out proof of that over the next couple of days or so. And I will stop sharing my screen and just say a massive thank you again to Baz, to Matt, to Lizzie, to Victoria, to Gavin, to everyone for kind of being here. The Includability website is now live, so go on there. We've got a kind of digital company advocates. We've got all the ambassadors creating their profiles. So come along. We've got webinars happening again all throughout the rest of June and into July. We'll put that on the email as well. But any questions, any follow-up that anyone's got, please get in touch with us. And like I said, we'll follow up with emails, with questions and answers along with this slide as well. Okay. So I think the rest kind of is just enjoy the rest of your afternoon, have a great rest of the week, and thanks again, Baz, you've done an amazing job hosting it. So thank you ever so much.